The phone was ringing again and again. I hadn't even gotten out of bed, but I already knew who it was. Only one person could be that persistent this early in the morning, Mrs. Thompson, my soon-to-be mother-in-law. Now, don't get me wrong, I respect her. But let's just say she's a handful. Always in everyone's business, always judging with those perfectly manicured nails and that pursed-lip smile that hides just how bossy she can be. When the doorbell rang, I wasn't surprised. She never called just to say hello. I opened the door, and there she was, standing like she owned the place. "Claudia, dear, we need to talk about the wedding dress," she said, walking past me like I was the doorman. I barely had time to respond before she waved a hand in the air. "The one you chose? It's not suitable. I found a much better one yesterday." I looked at her, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "It's only a bit over your budget," she added casually. "How much over?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "Well, double, but it's worth every penny," she said, her voice leaving no room for debate. I shot a glance at Lucy, my best friend, who was sitting on the couch. Her eyes widened, but she said nothing. "Mrs. Thompson, I can't afford that," I said gently. "Nonsense," she snapped. "It's your special day. Cut corners somewhere else. This dress is non-negotiable." And just like that, I felt backed into a corner. So I agreed. Not because I wanted to, but because it was easier than the battle I knew would follow. The next day, we went to the bridal shop. And yes, the dress was stunning. I couldn't deny that. I slipped into it, and for a second, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, the version of me I'd always dreamed of on my wedding day. Mrs. Thompson clapped her hands together. "That's it. We'll take it." "But the price," I began. She cut me off with a smile. "Don't worry about it. I'll help. Consider it my gift." For a moment, I felt my heart soften. Maybe I had judged her too harshly. Maybe underneath that hard exterior was someone who genuinely wanted to make me feel special. The wedding came. The dress was a hit. Everyone said I looked like a fairy tale bride. For once, I felt beautiful, seen, validated. But the magic wore off faster than the glitter on my shoes. After the honeymoon, I gently brought up the subject of the dress payment. Her expression? Blank. "Claudia, dear, I never said I'd pay for the whole thing. I said I'd help with choosing it." I blinked, trying to process what she just said. "But you promised—" She waved her hand like she was swatting away a fly. "You must have misunderstood. Anyway, what's done is done. No use crying over spilt milk." I stood there, my heart pounding, feeling cheated and foolish. Lucy had warned me, and I had ignored her. That was the beginning. The first real moment I realized what being part of this family might actually mean. It only got worse from there. It was a Thursday, gray, chilly, and quiet. The kind of day you wish would stay that way. But peace didn't last long in my house. I was in my home office, a tiny room tucked away from the chaos, filled with my notebooks, writing drafts, and half-empty coffee mugs. It was my sanctuary, my safe space. Then came the doorbell. I didn't even flinch. I already knew. Mrs. Thompson. "Claudia, dear, I'm here," she called out from the living room like she owned the place. No knock, no pause, no courtesy. I took a breath and walked out to meet her. "Hi, Mrs. Thompson," I said, forcing a smile. "Oh, there you are, hiding in your little room again," she said, peering into my office like it was a broom closet. "You really should get out more, Claudia." "I'm actually working," I said calmly. She waved her hand. "Writing, schmiting, you need to live a little." She plopped herself on the couch, reached for the remote, and turned on the TV. I stood there, stunned. My home was slowly turning into her afternoon hangout spot. "Mrs. Thompson," I said, still trying to be polite, "I was hoping to get some work done today." She barely looked at me. "Oh, your little stories can wait. I need to relax. I save so much on my electricity bill coming here, you know." I was speechless. That was new and bold. And to make things worse, she headed straight for the kitchen. "What's for lunch, Claudia? I'm starving." She opened my fridge like it was hers. "I haven't prepared anything yet," I said, following her, trying to stay composed. "No problem," she replied, pulling out eggs and bread. "I'll make do with what you've got, though you really should stock up better." I just stood there, watching her take over my kitchen, use my groceries, drain my energy. Then Alex walked in. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "Just visiting, darling," she said sweetly. "Claudia and I are having such a lovely time." I looked at him, silently pleading for some backup. He glanced at me, then shrugged and sat on the couch. Nothing. No help, no support, just silence and TV. As the sun set and painted the walls of my tiny office in warm gold, I sat back at my desk, trying to escape back into the world I was writing. Dragons, magic, daring heroines. I was halfway through a scene when the door slammed open. Mrs. Thompson stood there furious. "Claudia, what on earth are you still doing in here?" she barked. "You act like you're married to that computer. There's a real world out there, you know." I paused, breathed, tried not to react. "I'm working, Mrs. Thompson. This is my job," she scoffed. "You call sitting on your behind all day writing fairy tales a job?" She laughed. "Biggest joke I've ever heard." I tried to keep my voice calm. "I'm a published author. This is not a hobby. This is my career." She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. "Published? Schmublished? All that fantasy nonsense is for children. Get a real job. Contribute something useful to society." Each word felt like a slap. Alex showed up in the doorway then, arms crossed. "What's going on?" His mother jumped in before I could answer. "Your wife here thinks she's saving the world with her little stories." Alex looked at me, cold, flat. "Claudia, she's right. This isn't a real job. You need to stop living in Fantasyland and do something worthwhile." Something in me snapped. "Alex, I am doing something worthwhile. My books are sold internationally. People actually read them." He laughed. "International? Please, how much do you even make? It's a joke." I clenched my fists under the desk, my voice steady but shaking. "My writing contributes. It matters to me. It's not about money, it's my life's work." He shook his head. "Passion won't pay the bills. Time to grow up." Their words circled around me like vultures. I felt suffocated. Their judgment, their dismissal, it crushed something inside me. "I don't need this," I finally said, standing up. "I don't have to explain myself to you, not anymore." "Oh, now you're defensive," Alex sneered. Classic Claudia. Mrs. Thompson, of course, had to chime in. "You'll thank us one day, Claudia, when you finally wake up and live in the real world." They left, their footsteps echoing like thunder down the hall. I stayed in that office, my head in my hands, the air heavy with the weight of everything I'd been holding in. Their voices faded, but their words stayed, digging in, hurting. I stared at the blinking cursor on the screen. I wanted to write a dragon who could burn it all down. Saturday mornings used to mean peace, pancakes, slow coffee, maybe a few pages of reading or writing. Now it meant war. The clock had barely touched 10 when the front door burst open. "Hey, Claudia!" It was Susan, Alex's sister, with her 3 energetic children in tow. The moment they stepped in, the house turned into a playground. If the playground had no supervision, no rules, and 0 respect for property. The kids scattered, knocking over pillows, toys, whatever was in their path. "Hope we're not too early," Susan said cheerfully, already settling on my couch like she lived there. I plastered on a smile. "No, of course not." Inside, I was screaming. Susan let out a long sigh, stretching her legs. "I'm exhausted. The kids have been driving me crazy all week. Thank God for Saturdays, right?" "Right," I said, already walking to the kitchen. "Coffee?" "Yes, please. Oh, and could you make some of your famous pancakes? The kids are starving." It wasn't a request, it was an expectation. I nodded, my weekend melting away before my eyes. As I juggled coffee, batter, and wild children zooming around my feet, Alex wandered in, frowning. "Why do you always buy such expensive ingredients?" he asked, eyeing the vanilla beans and almond flour. I froze. "Because your sister and her kids eat here every weekend. It adds up." He shrugged. "Well, they're family. You can use simpler stuff. Save money." I wanted to scream. Here I was, running a free daycare and diner, and he was lecturing me about groceries. The day passed in a blur of spilled syrup, broken crayons, and endless cleaning. By the time Susan packed up her tornadoes and left, I collapsed onto the couch, utterly drained. Alex sat beside me, sighing. "You really should learn to be more economical. It's not about showing off." I looked at him, baffled. "I'm not showing off. I'm trying to be a decent host. You never say no to them." He rolled his eyes. "I'm just trying to help you manage better. You take everything so personally." The irony of it all nearly choked me. I was the one cleaning, cooking, organizing, and somehow I was the problem. Later that night, when the house was finally quiet, I snuck into my office. Midnight had become my secret hour, the only time I had to write. The glow from the screen comforted me like an old friend. I got lost in my story, just for a while. Then the door creaked open. "Alex." He stood there, arms crossed. "Claudia, are you seriously still up? You're going to spike our electricity bill." I blinked, trying to keep calm. "This is the only time I get to write, Alex. You know how busy the house is during the day." He stepped into the room, shaking his head. "Hectic? That's just family life. It's what you're supposed to do. And this night owl thing, it's not helping. You need to think about the bills. Be practical. I stood up slowly. Really? Bills? That's what you're worried about? Not the fact that I'm working my butt off to chase a dream that matters to me? He scoffed. Dream, Claudia, this is a hobby. You're not exactly on the bestseller list. I'm published. My books sell. To who? Teenagers? He snapped. Fantasy isn't a real job. Be realistic. My voice trembled with frustration. This hobby, as you call it, is my passion. It's the one thing that's mine. He folded his arms. All I see is a wife who cares more about imaginary dragons than her real-life responsibilities. His words cut deep. But I didn't cry, not this time. My writing is who I am, Alex. I'm not giving it up because you think it's useless. He shrugged. Fine. Keep playing pretend. Just don't expect me to support it. With that, he walked out, leaving me in a room that suddenly felt colder. Tears pricked my eyes, but I wiped them away. This was more than just about writing. It was about being seen. And in this house, I was invisible. The kitchen was suffocating. I was stirring a pot of soup when Alex walked in, and right behind him, like a shadow that never rested, was Mrs. Thompson. He didn't even ease into it. Susan and her husband are going away for 2 weeks. They're leaving the kids with us. I froze, spoon midair. 2 weeks? You're serious? Mrs. Thompson chimed in without missing a beat. It's family, Claudia. You can't say no to family. But I have deadlines, I said, my voice firm. I have a book due. I can't just babysit for 2 weeks straight. Alex laughed, but it wasn't funny. It was sharp, almost cruel. Oh, please. You're writing? It's not like you're publishing the next great novel. You can take a break. I turned to Mrs. Thompson, desperate for someone to be reasonable. Maybe the kids could stay with you instead. She looked horrified. Me? Take care of 3 kids at my age? Absolutely not. I've done my part raising children. I bit my lip. What about hiring a nanny for 2 weeks? They both stared at me like I'd grown another head. A nanny? Mrs. Thompson hissed the word like it was toxic. Why waste money when you're already here? Alex nodded. Exactly. We're not made of money, Claudia. Be sensible. Sensible? That word again. So I'm supposed to give up 2 weeks of work, my own schedule, my sanity, for free, and I'm the one who's not being sensible? Alex's tone changed. He leaned in close, his voice sharp. This isn't up for discussion, Claudia. This is what families do for each other. You're part of this family, or have you forgotten that? I stood still, my hands trembling. No, Alex, I haven't forgotten. But you've forgotten that I have a life too. I matter. Mrs. Thompson scoffed. Commitments? To your fairy tale scribbles? Don't be dramatic. It's just 2 weeks of babysitting. That did it. It's not just babysitting, I snapped. It's my time, my job, my passion. Why can't either of you understand that? Alex narrowed his eyes. Because, Claudia, in the real world, people make sacrifices. They do what needs to be done, for family. I shook with frustration. And what about sacrifices for me? What about my dreams? Or do they not count because I don't wear a suit or work in an office? Then he dropped it. The line that would change everything. If you don't do this, Claudia, it's over. I'll file for divorce. Silence. Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow as if daring me to protest. I stared at Alex, the man I thought I knew. My voice when it came was calm. Okay. He blinked. Okay? Yes, I said, my heart thudding. Do what you need to do. They didn't see the plan I had already put in motion. I had rented a small apartment a few blocks away. Quiet. Cozy. Mine. I had moved my essentials while they were out. The day the kids were supposed to arrive, I watched from the window as Susan's car pulled up. Mrs. Thompson greeted them like a proud grandmother. Alex hovered nearby, already overwhelmed. Claudia, darling, she called out sweetly. Could you help with the kids? I walked into the room, smiled, and said, of course. But before she could say more, I grabbed my purse. Actually, I need to head out for groceries. I'll be back soon. Alex frowned. Now? You're leaving now? I smiled. You'll manage, right? Mrs. Thompson's fake sweetness melted into irritation. You're being completely irresponsible. I didn't answer. I just walked out the door, and I didn't come back. Instead, I went straight to my new apartment. Everything was ready. I lit a candle, took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, I felt free. I left the divorce papers in my desk drawer at home, signed and waiting. My phone buzzed for hours. Alex, Mrs. Thompson, even Susan. I ignored them all. That night, as I lay in my quiet bed, the silence was like music. I imagined them, trying to wrangle 3 kids, run a household, survive without their emotional punching bag. The next day, I met Lucy for coffee. "You really did it," she said, eyes sparkling. "I heard Susan refused to come back early. Your mother-in-law's losing it." I laughed. "Yeah, Susan said she needed a break. Can you imagine the meltdown?" Lucy leaned in. "By the way, your book, it's flying off shelves. Everyone's talking about it." I smiled, the kind of a smile that comes from the soul. "I poured everything into it. It's my best work yet." She smirked. "The villain, she reminds me of a certain someone." I laughed. "Really? I hadn't noticed." As I walked back to my apartment, I thought about how far I'd come. Leaving Alex and that house wasn't just about breaking free from a toxic relationship. It was about choosing myself, my work, my life. My latest book had found success. Readers loved the strong heroine and despised the controlling villain. Funny how fiction can reveal the deepest truths. This wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning.